The morning mist clings to the banks of the Potomac River like a shroud, obscuring the muddy flats and the scattered shanties that line the Virginia shore, a place known to the locals as Hell's Bottom. It is a humid, suffocating landscape where the air hangs heavy with the scent of brackish water, burning trash, and the faint, metallic tang of industrial exhaust drifting over from the capital. This is not the marble-white Washington of monuments and high ideals, but the gritty, forgotten underbelly where the soil is soft and treacherous, a slurry of silt and history that threatens to swallow anything heavy enough to rest upon it. In the early hours of a summer dawn in 1941, the silence here is profound, broken only by the lap of the river against the weeds and the occasional distant rumble of a truck on the Arlington roadways. It is a landscape waiting for violence, a quiet canvas upon which the most massive structure of the 20th century is about to be imposed. There is a sense of foreboding in the geography itself, a resistance in the earth, as if the ground knows that it is about to be burdened with a weight far greater than stone and concrete. The people who live here, mostly poor descendants of freed slaves, exist in a precarious equilibrium with the rising waters and the indifference of the federal government, unaware that their homes, their histories, and their very existence on this patch of land are about to be erased by the stroke of a pen. The camera pans slowly over the reeds, catching the glint of a discarded bottle, the rust on a corrugated tin roof, the stillness of a world on the brink of annihilation. This is the site where the logic of war will solidify into geometry, where a five-sided shape will rise from the swamp to dictate the fate of millions. But for now, it is just mud. It is a place of low elevation and low expectations, separated from the seat of power by a river that acts as both a physical and psychological barrier. To the planners in the War Department, looking down from their overcrowded, sweltering offices in the munitions building on the mall, this land is nothing more than a void on a map, a convenient blank space where they can dump the sprawling, chaotic machinery of a military that is rapidly outgrowing its shell. They do not see the community. They see acreage. They do not see the swamp. They see a foundation. The decision to build here is not born of aesthetic desire or urban planning genius, but of desperate necessity and a callous disregard for what already exists. It is the first act of a tragedy that disguises itself as a triumph of engineering, a moment where the natural world is subjugated to the will of a bureaucracy preparing for global conflagration. The fog lifts slowly, revealing the vast emptiness of the Arlington Agricultural Experimental Farm and the Hoover Airport nearby, a patchwork of fields and runways that feels archaic, a relic of a slower time that is being ruthlessly swept aside by the gathering storm clouds of the Second World War. Washington in the summer of 1941 is a city besieged not by enemy armies, but by its own inefficiency, a sweltering southern town struggling to play the role of a global superpower's capital. The War Department, the nerve center of the nation's defense, is a sprawling disaster, scattered across 17 different buildings throughout the District of Columbia and spreading like a virus into Maryland and Virginia. Officers spend half their days in transit, shuttling documents between the munitions building on the National Mall, a temporary structure from the First World War that was never meant to last this long, and rented office spaces in apartment blocks, warehouses, and private residences. The inefficiency is staggering, a logistical nightmare that threatens to paralyze the military just as the drums of war in Europe and Asia are reaching a deafening crescendo. Inside the munitions building, the air is stagnant, thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of sweating men in wool uniforms, the corridors clogged with filing cabinets that seem to multiply overnight. There is a palpable sense of panic beneath the veneer of bureaucratic order, a realization that the current infrastructure is wholly inadequate for the scale of the conflict looming on the horizon. The hallways echo with the frantic clatter of typewriters and the ringing of telephones that never stop, a cacophony of preparation for a war that the country is technically not yet fighting. It is here, in this pressure cooker of frustration and heat, that the idea for a single, consolidated headquarters is born, not as a grand monument to martial glory, but as a desperate administrative fix. The men in charge are drowning in paper and lost time, their commands diluted by the physical distance between their departments. They need a hive. They need a fortress. But more than anything, they need a machine that can process the sheer volume of logistics required to mobilize a nation. The atmosphere is one of frantic improvisation, a government trying to retrofit a sleepy capital into a command center capable of spanning the globe. The disconnect between the neoclassical grandeur of the Capitol Dome and the squalid, overcrowded reality of the War Department offices is a visual metaphor for the state of the nation, high ideals resting on a crumbling, disorganized foundation. Every day that passes with the army fractured across the city is a day lost to the enemy, and in the minds of the generals, time has become the most precious commodity of all. They look out their windows at the serene monuments of Lincoln and Washington and see only obstacles, wasting assets, and inefficiencies. The romanticism of the past is dead. The era of industrial warfare demands a new kind of architecture, one that prioritizes function over form, speed over beauty, and sheer, overwhelming size over human scale. The city is choking on its own growth, and the only solution is to excise the heart of the military and transplant it across the river, to build a city within a city where the business of war can be conducted without the interference of traffic, tourists, or the constraints of civilian life. Enter Brigadier General Brehan Somervell, the chief of the construction division of the Army Quartermaster Corps, a man whose ambition is matched only by his complete lack of patience. Somervell is not a philosopher. He is a force of nature, a man with a thin mustache and eyes that seem to bore through the excuses of his subordinates. He is a builder of the old school, a technocrat who believes that any problem, no matter how complex, can be solved with enough concrete, steel, and brute force. He has spent his career taming rivers and building infrastructure, and he approaches the problem of the War Department's housing crisis with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to the Works Progress Administration projects in New York. To Somervell, the scattered state of the War Department is a personal affront, a chaotic mess that offends his sensibilities as an engineer and a soldier. He does not want a debate. He wants a solution, and he wants it yesterday. His psychological profile is that of the quintessential autocrat, a man who thrives in crisis and views consensus as a weakness. He is driven by a deep-seated insecurity masked by bluster, a need to leave a permanent mark on the world that cannot be eroded by time or politics. He envisions a headquarters that will dwarf anything the world has ever seen, a structure that projects the invincible power of the United States Army. On a Thursday afternoon in July 1941, he summons his architects and gives them an impossible directive. Design a building that can house 40,000 workers, complete with all necessary amenities, and have the plans on his desk by Monday morning. It is a demand that borders on madness, a timeline that defies all logic of architectural practice. But Somervell is not asking. He is commanding. He is the engine of the project, the driving wheel that pushes the boulder up the hill. He cares nothing for the complaints of the designers or the budgetary concerns of Congress. In his mind, the building already exists. It is merely a matter of forcing the physical world to catch up with his vision. He is a dangerous man in a dangerous time, a visionary whose dreams are made of reinforced concrete and whose nightmares are made of delay. He paces his office, a caged tiger, barking orders into the telephone, maneuvering through the bureaucracy with the grace of a shark in water. He knows that to build this, he must bypass the usual channels, he must lie about the costs, and he must steamroll anyone who stands in his way. He is the architect of the architecture, the unseen hand that will mold the skyline of Virginia into a shape that will become synonymous with American military power. The task of translating Somervell's megalomania into blueprints falls to George Bergstrom, a mild-mannered architect who suddenly finds himself staring into the abyss of an impossible deadline. Bergstrom, the president of the American Institute of Architects, is a man of classical training and refined tastes, accustomed to the slow, deliberate pace of monumental design. Now, he is trapped in a sweltering room over a single weekend, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, trying to solve a puzzle that has no easy answer. The site originally chosen is Arlington Farms, a plot of land bounded by roads that meet at odd angles, creating an asymmetrical pentagonal shape. It is this geographical constraint, this accident of the map, that dictates the form of the building. Bergstrom and his team do not choose the Pentagon shape for its mystical symbolism or its defensive capabilities. They choose it because it is the only shape that fits the land while maximizing the square footage. They work feverishly, sketching and discarding ideas, their hands cramping, their eyes blurring from exhaustion. The air in the room is thick with tension, the architects aware that they are designing not just a building, but a machine. They strip away all ornamentation, all the Beaux-Arts flourishes that define official Washington, and reduce the structure to its barest essentials. Concentric rings, radial corridors, a fortress of efficiency. When the site is later moved to the Hoover Airport location, a larger, flatter tract of land, the pentagonal shape is retained, not out of necessity anymore, but because there is simply no time to redesign it. The hurry of that lost weekend becomes fossilized in the building's footprint. Bergstrom is designing his own tomb in a way. The stress of the project will eventually break him, forcing his resignation before the building is even complete. He is the first casualty of the Pentagon, a man consumed by the very monster he helped create. The drawings that emerge from that chaotic session are stark, brutal, and imposing. They depict a building that turns its back on the world, a closed loop of authority with few entrances and endless corridors. It is a design born of panic and pragmatism, a striated classical style that strips the columns of their capitals and the walls of their relief, leaving only the raw expression of mass and weight. Bergstrom looks at the plans and sees the compromises, the corners cut, the elegance sacrificed for speed. But Somervell looks at the plans and sees victory. The shape is unique, instantly recognizable, a brand for the war effort. It is a hive for the worker bees of the military-industrial complex, a design that prioritizes the collective over the individual. As the sun rises on Monday morning, the blueprints are ready, a testament to human endurance and the terrifying power of a deadline. But a design is not a building, and before a single shovel can strike the earth, the project must survive the treacherous waters of Congress. The initial price tag is estimated at $35 million, a staggering sum for a single building in 1941, and Somervell knows that if he tells the truth about the final cost, the project will be dead on arrival. So, the dance of deception begins. The hearings are a theater of the absurd, with generals testifying about efficiency and consolidation while carefully omitting the astronomical costs of infrastructure, roads, and the specialized foundations required for the swampy soil. There is resistance, fierce and vocal. Preservationists and congressmen recoil at the idea of placing such a massive, industrial scar at the foot of Arlington National Cemetery, fearing it will desecrate the view from the Lincoln Memorial and ruin the solemnity of the Capitol. They argue that it is too big, too permanent, a monolith that will be useless once the war is over. Who will need a building for 40,000 people in peacetime? The question hangs in the air, unanswered because the answer, that the war machine will never truly shrink again, is too terrifying to contemplate. President Roosevelt, a man with a keen interest in architecture and a sentimental attachment to the vistas of Washington, intervenes. He dislikes the initial location at the farm because it interferes with the sightlines. He orders the site moved downriver to the old airport, a decision that saves the view but complicates the construction, plunging the builders into the deepest, wettest part of Hell's Bottom. The political maneuvering is as brutal as the construction to come. Somervell bullies, cajoles, and threatens. He frames the building as a matter of national survival, equating opposition to the project with softness on defense. The deal is cut in smoke-filled rooms, where the urgency of the expanding war in Europe silences the critics. The budget is approved, though everyone knows it is a fiction. The true cost will be double, triple the estimate, but by the time the bills come due, the concrete will already be set. This is the dark art of government procurement. Get the shovel in the ground first, and apologize for the cost later. The legislative victory is a triumph of cynicism, a recognition that in times of fear, the checkbook is always open. The approval is granted, and the machinery of the state grinds into gear to seize the land, evict the tenants, and clear the way for the inevitable. The stage is set, the actors are in place, and the script is written in the language of eminent domain and emergency powers. On September 11, 1941, exactly 60 years before the building will be scarred by fire and steel from the sky, the ground is broken. The date is a coincidence of history, a grim bookend that will only be recognized decades later, but in the moment, it is just a sultry Thursday. There is no grand fanfare, no massive crowds cheering. A few officials gather in the mud, their shoes sinking into the soft earth, to turn the ceremonial soil. The atmosphere is businesslike, hurried. The construction contract has been awarded to a consortium of companies led by John McShane, the man who built Washington, a figure of immense capability who understands that this job is different from any other. As the shovels bite into the dirt, the reality of the displacement begins. The residents of Hell's Bottom and the surrounding areas are given notices to vacate. Families who have lived on the land for generations, scratching out a living in the shadow of the capital, are told to leave. Their homes are bulldozed, their gardens trampled, their histories erased to make room for the parking lots and the cloverleaf interchanges. The violence of construction begins with the violence of eviction. The roar of the engines replaces the quiet of the riverbank. It is a scene of mechanized destruction, the landscape being torn apart to be remade. The groundbreaking is literal. The earth is wounded, gouged open to receive the millions of tons of concrete that will soon be poured into its veins. There is a sense of urgency that borders on panic. Somervell wants the building finished in barely a year. The schedule requires not just speed, but a complete suspension of the normal laws of physics and labor. The groundbreaking marks the end of the natural history of this place and the beginning of its political history. The soil, once defined by its geological composition, is now defined by its strategic utility. The men standing in the mud in their suits and hats look out over the expanse and see the future, but they cannot see the cost. They cannot see the accidents, the heart attacks, the broken bodies that will be ground into the mortar. They only see the timeline. The clock has started ticking, and it is a countdown that will not stop until the final stone is laid. The irony of the date hangs over the scene like a ghost, a silent reminder that history is a circle, and that the structures we build to protect us are often the very things that draw the fire. The machine of construction roars to life with a ferocity that Washington has never seen. This is not a building site. It is a battlefield. To manage the chaos, the Army brings in Colonel Leslie Groves, a man who will later go on to manage the Manhattan Project. If Somervell is the visionary, Groves is the hammer. He is a large, imposing man with a reputation for being absolutely intolerable, a relentless taskmaster who prowls the site, berating contractors, firing slackers, and pushing the logistics to the breaking point. Groves understands that to build the Pentagon in the allotted time, he must create a logistical supply chain that rivals a military invasion. He orchestrates the arrival of materials from all over the country: sand and gravel from the Potomac, steel from the Midwest, limestone from Indiana. The roads leading to the site become choked with trucks, a river of metal flowing towards the river of mud. The site operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, bathed in the harsh glare of floodlights that turn the night into a perpetual, ghostly twilight. It is a city that never sleeps, a cacophony of pile drivers, cement mixers, and shouting foremen. The invisible army of laborers swells to thousands. Men desperate for work as the Depression fades. Men too old for the draft. African-American laborers who are given the hardest, dirtiest jobs in the pits. They are the fuel for the machine. Groves treats them as interchangeable parts, essential but expendable. The pace is brutal. Concrete is poured before the drawings are even finished. Walls go up while the foundations are still settling. It is design build on a suicidal scale. The architects are staying just one step ahead of the builders, sketching details on napkins and scrap paper and running them out to the foreman. Mistakes are made, covered up, and built over. There is no time for correction, only forward momentum. The muddy field transforms into a vast, churning sea of activity, a spectacle of industrial might that awes the locals who watch from the ridges. The sheer scale of the operation is terrifying. It consumes resources with a voracious appetite, sucking in steel and timber that is desperately needed elsewhere, but the priority is absolute. The Pentagon must rise. Groves stalks the mud, his boots caked in the Potomac clay, a tyrant in his kingdom, ensuring that the will of the army is translated into stone, no matter the human cost. Then comes Sunday, December 7th, 1941. The news of Pearl Harbor hits the construction site like a physical blow. The radio reports crackle through the break rooms and the shanties, bringing the distant war crashing into the reality of the Virginia mud. Suddenly, the project is no longer about preparedness. It is about survival. The mood shifts instantly from urgency to desperation. The theoretical enemy is now real, and the need for the command center becomes existential. The workers, many of whom have brothers and sons who will soon be shipping out, redouble their efforts. The skepticism about the building's size and cost evaporates overnight. The boondoggle is now the bastion. Somervell and Groves use the attack to strip away the last remnants of bureaucratic resistance. They are given a blank check. The timeline is compressed even further. The building becomes a weapon itself, a response to the Japanese aggression. If the enemy has struck at the heart of the fleet, America will build a heart of stone that cannot be broken. The psychology of the site changes. The exhaustion is replaced by a grim resolve. The lights burn brighter. The pile drivers hit harder. The construction site becomes a microcosm of the national mobilization. Men work until they drop, fueled by patriotism and rage. The abstract lines on Bergstrom's blueprints are now lines of defense. The five sides take on a new meaning, a shield against a world that has gone mad. The attack accelerates the transformation of the American psyche, and the Pentagon rises as the physical manifestation of that shift. It is no longer just an office building. It is a temple of war, consecrated by the blood of the sailors in Hawaii. The steel that was being saved is now poured into the structure without hesitation. The constraints are gone. The beast is unleashed. In the weeks following Pearl Harbor, the skeleton of the building leaps out of the ground, driven by the collective will of a nation that has awakened to its own power. The mud of Arlington is churned with a new fury, the peaceful riverbank lost forever to the thunder of a superpower rising. But beneath the patriotic fervor lies the brutal reality of the geology. The site is a swamp, a geological nightmare of alluvial silt and unstable clay. To build a fortress here requires a war against the earth itself. The engineers have to drive over 40,000 concrete piles into the muck to find bedrock, a task of Sisyphean proportions. The sound of the pile drivers becomes the heartbeat of Arlington, a rhythmic thudding that shakes the windows of houses miles away. They dredge the Potomac River for millions of tons of sand and gravel to make the concrete, reshaping the riverbed, altering the flow of the water to feed the insatiable appetite of the mixers. The site is a quagmire. When it rains, the mud sucks the boots off the workers' feet. Trucks sink to their axles and have to be dragged out by bulldozers. It is a primal battle, man against mud. The sheer volume of material required is mind-bending: 435,000 cubic yards of concrete, 680,000 tons of sand and gravel. This material is not just delivered. It is wrested from the earth. The invisible army of laborers works knee-deep in freezing slime, their hands raw, their backs breaking. They are the unsung heroes of the architecture, the men whose sweat binds the aggregate together. There is no glory in this phase, only the grind. The pylons go down, deep into the dark earth, anchoring the structure against the shifting tides of the river. It is a feat of engineering that goes largely unseen, buried forever beneath the basement slabs. The stability of the Pentagon relies on this hidden forest of concrete columns, a subterranean intervention that defies the natural order of the terrain. The engineers fight the water table constantly, pumping out millions of gallons to keep the excavations dry. It is a wet, dirty, miserable job, but it is the foundation of everything that follows. The building is literally rooted in the sediment of the Potomac, drawing its strength from the river that defines the boundary between north and south. The mud is conquered, covered, and sealed, but it is never truly gone. It waits beneath the floorboards, a reminder of the fluid, unstable ground upon which the solid certainty of the military is built. As the walls rise, a different kind of structure is built into the plumbing, the architecture of segregation. The Pentagon is being built in Virginia, a state governed by Jim Crow laws that mandate separate facilities for white and black citizens. But it is a federal building, theoretically subject to the orders of President Roosevelt, who has issued Executive Order 8802 prohibiting discrimination in the defense industry. The clash between federal mandate and state law plays out in the bathrooms. The engineers, caught in the middle and under pressure from Virginia authorities, designed the building with double the necessary restrooms and dining halls. One set for whites, one for colored. It is a physical manifestation of the racial schizophrenia of the era. The pipes are laid to separate the waste of human beings based on the color of their skin. It is a redundancy born of racism, a waste of space and plumbing materials in a time of critical shortage. When Roosevelt visits the site and sees the rows of white and colored signs, he is reportedly furious, ordering the signs taken down. But the extra bathrooms remain, a silent architectural testament to the bigotry of the time. The building is designed to enforce a social hierarchy even as it fights a war against fascism abroad. The irony is bitter and inescapable. The black laborers who are pouring the concrete and laying the bricks are building a facility that treats them as second-class citizens. They are building the arsenal of democracy while being denied democracy's most basic dignities. The layout of the cafeteria, the location of the water fountains, the very flow of the corridors, all are infected by the virus of segregation. The Pentagon is not just a military machine. It is a social container that preserves the prejudices of 1941 in amber. Even after the signs are removed, the duplication of facilities persists, a confusing legacy that leaves modern visitors wondering why there are so many restrooms side by side. It is a shameful chapter written in ceramic tile and porcelain, a reminder that the greatest generation was fighting a war on two fronts, and that the enemy was not always across the ocean. The walls of the Pentagon enclose this history, hiding the internal divisions of the country behind a unified facade of limestone. Inside the rising skeleton, the aesthetic of the building begins to take shape, defined not by style, but by shortage. Steel is the most precious commodity in the war economy, needed for tanks, ships, and guns. Somervell issues a strict order: save steel at all costs. This directive forces the architects to abandon the traditional steel frame construction of skyscrapers and rely on reinforced concrete. The Pentagon becomes a concrete monolith. The ramps that spiral between floors are not a stylistic choice. They are built to avoid using steel for elevators. The limestone facing is a thin veneer over a brutal concrete core. The building is stripped of all metal ornamentation. There are no bronze doors, no copper gutters, no brass railings. Everything is wood, concrete, or stone. The striated classical style that emerges is grim, heavy, and imposing. It looks like a fortress because it is built like one. The columns are simple vertical lines. The cornices are minimal. It is an architecture of austerity. The lack of elevators creates a unique internal geography. People must walk the ramps, creating a constant flow of pedestrian traffic that mimics the circulation of blood in a body. The building is horizontal, not vertical, hugging the ground to avoid becoming a silhouette for enemy bombers and to save on the steel required for high-rise supports. This constraint creates the groundscraper effect, a building that dominates through its footprint rather than its height. The aesthetic is one of raw power, unadorned and unapologetic. It is the architectural equivalent of a tank. Ugly to some, beautiful in its functionality to others, but undeniably formidable. The texture of the building is rough, the concrete often showing the grain of the wooden forms used to mold it. It is a building that does not try to charm. It tries to intimidate. The shortage of materials forces innovation, but it also creates a stark, cold environment. The Pentagon is a child of the shortage, a structure that makes a virtue out of necessity. It stands as a monument to the resourcefulness of the engineers who found a way to build the largest office building in the world with one hand tied behind their backs. The silence of the missing steel is deafening. Every concrete ramp is a ghost of a battleship that was built instead. The human cost of this frantic construction is tallied in broken bones and exhausted spirits. With 15,000 workers swarming the site at the peak of construction, accidents are inevitable. Men fall from scaffolding, are crushed by shifting loads, or collapse from heatstroke in the Virginia summer. The safety standards are lax, sacrificed on the altar of speed. The ambulances are a common sight, weaving through the mud to ferry the injured to local hospitals. But the toll is not just physical. It is psychological. George Bergstrom, the chief architect, watches his creation rise with a growing sense of dread. The pressure from Somerville and Groves is relentless. They demand changes on the fly, scream about delays, and pit contractors against each other. Bergstrom, a man of precision, is forced to work in chaos. His health begins to fail. The stress triggers a physical breakdown, and he is forced to resign in April 1942, leaving the project before the roof is even on. He is the Icarus of the Pentagon, flying too close to the sun of the military-industrial complex. His replacement, David Whitmer, steps into the breach, but the shadow of Bergstrom's burnout hangs over the drafting rooms. The engineers and draftsmen work 80-hour weeks, their eyes red-rimmed, their marriages straining under the weight of their absence. They are the white-collar casualties of the campaign. The laborers, too, are pushed to the limit. They sleep in shifts, eat standing up, and work until their muscles seize. There is a sense of patriotic duty, yes, but also a grim fatalism. They are feeding the machine with their life force. The turnover is high. Men quit, unable to take the pace, only to be replaced by new recruits from the unemployment lines. The building consumes them. It is a carnivorous entity that grows stronger as the men grow weaker. The archives contain the sanitized reports of man-hours and safety records, but they do not record the sheer misery of the 2 a.m. shift in the freezing rain, or the terror of a cable snapping under tension. The Pentagon is built on a foundation of human exhaustion. It is a pyramid built by free men who are nonetheless slaves to the moment, driven by the whip of war. As the rings close, the labyrinth is born. The layout of the Pentagon is a mathematical marvel and a navigational nightmare. 5 concentric rings, A, B, C, D, and E, connected by 10 radial corridors like the spokes of a wheel. It is designed for efficiency, the theory being that one can walk between any 2 points in the building in under 7 minutes. But in practice, it is a maze. The geometry is disorienting. Because of the wedges and the angles, it is easy to lose one's sense of direction. Newcomers find themselves walking in endless circles, passing the same water fountain 3 times, trapped in a loop of beige hallways. The connectivity creates confusion. Stories abound of delivery boys getting lost for days, of generals wandering the corridors looking for their own offices. The design philosophy creates a closed system, a world unto itself where the outside reality disappears. Once you are in the rings, you are nowhere and everywhere. The corridors stretch for miles, 17.5 miles in total, lined with identical doors and identical lights. It is a bureaucratic purgatory. The numbering system for the rooms is a code that takes weeks to decipher. The E-ring, the outermost ring with the windows facing the world, becomes the domain of the elite, the generals and the admirals, while the inner rings, windowless and deep, are for the drones. The architecture creates a caste system. The layout reinforces the insularity of the military mind. It is a fortress that looks inward. The courtyard in the center, a 5-acre park, becomes the only reference point, a patch of sky in a sea of stone. They call it Ground Zero, a grim joke that it is the most likely target of a Soviet nuke, but also a recognition that it is the center of the world. The labyrinthine nature of the building is not just a quirk. It is a feature. It swallows people. It dilutes individual identity into the collective hum of the hive. The confusion of the corridors mirrors the confusion of the war itself. Massive, complex, and overwhelming. To navigate the Pentagon is to navigate the bureaucracy. You must know the code, you must know the shortcuts, and you must keep moving or you will be lost in the rings forever. The occupation begins before the building is even finished. In a surreal overlap of construction and operation, the first wave of Army workers moves in during the spring of 1942, while the other side of the building is still an open frame. They work at desks covered in dust, the sound of jackhammers rattling their coffee cups. They shout over the noise of rivet guns. It is a scene of chaotic synergy. Generals planning the invasion of North Africa in one room, while bricklayers build the wall of the next room. There are no partitions yet, just vast open bays filled with rows of desks that vanish into the distance. The air is filled with the smell of wet plaster and floor wax. The workers navigate over planks and through construction zones to get to the bathrooms. It is a living, breathing organism that is growing around its inhabitants. This soft opening, is a testament to the desperate need for the space. They cannot wait for the ribbon cutting. The war is moving too fast. The juxtaposition is jarring. The high-stakes decisions of global conflict being made by men sitting in a construction zone. It reinforces the idea that the Pentagon is not a monument but a tool. You don't wait for the polish on a wrench before you use it. The staff adapts, developing a camaraderie born of the shared hardship of the noise and the dust. They are the pioneers of the Pentagon, settling the frontier of the office space while the wilderness is still being tamed around them. The frantic energy of the builders bleeds into the work of the strategists. The tempo of the war and the tempo of the construction synchronize. The building pulses with a dual rhythm, the pounding of the hammer and the pounding of the typewriter. It is a unique moment in history where the creation of the container and the content happen simultaneously. The building learns its purpose as it is being built. The chaotic occupation sets the tone for the culture of the Pentagon. Functionally chaotic, perpetually unfinished, and driven by an urgency that supersedes comfort. By January 1943, the fortress is complete. The dedication is a quiet affair, overshadowed by the news from the front, but the statistics of the finished structure are staggering. It is the largest office building in the world, with 3 times the floor space of the Empire State Building. Contains 6.5 million square feet. It has 85,000 light fixtures, 13 elevators, for freight only, and 284 bathrooms. The phone system is large enough to serve a city of 125,000 people. It is a behemoth. The sheer, overwhelming size of it stuns the public. It is a new kind of sublime, the military-industrial sublime. It is too big to comprehend from the ground. It can only be truly understood from the air, a viewpoint that few possess. It sits on the Virginia bank like a landed spaceship, alien and massive. The critics who called it a boondoggle are silenced by its utility. It swallows the War Department whole, bringing 30,000 people under one roof. The efficiency gains are immediate. The machine works. Documents that used to take days to travel across Washington now take minutes to move down a corridor. The Pentagon becomes the physical brain of the Allied war effort. It is a triumph of Somervell's will and Groves's whip. The cost, finally tallied, is over $80 million, vastly more than the original lie, but a drop in the bucket of the war budget. The building stands as a fait accompli. It is there, it is solid, and it is working. The completion marks the end of the swamp era and the beginning of the superpower era. The Pentagon is no longer a project. It is a place. It has gravity. It begins to accumulate history. The decisions made within its walls send ripples across the oceans, determining the fate of nations. The concrete has cured, the limestone has settled, and the silence of the structure masks the noise of the orders emanating from within. It is a completed fortress, a castle for the 20th century, lacking a moat but defended by the terrifying reach of its occupants. But as World War II ends, the question arises, what to do with the machine? The original promise that the building would be turned into a hospital or a storage archive after the war is quickly forgotten. The Cold War begins before the ink on the surrender documents is dry. The Pentagon does not shrink. It solidifies. The purpose shifts from defeating the Axis to containing the Soviets. The temporary War Department becomes the permanent Department of Defense. The building, designed for a specific conflict, adapts to a perpetual state of readiness. It becomes the symbol of the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower will later warn against. The interior is reconfigured. The maps of Europe are replaced by maps of the Soviet bloc. The Situation Room becomes a permanent fixture. The building realizes it was not built for a war, but for war itself. It creates a gravitational pull that keeps the military centrally located in the national consciousness. The Ground Zero Courtyard Cafe becomes the stuff of legend. Soviet spies reportedly thought it was the entrance to a secret underground bunker because of the volume of high-ranking officers entering and exiting, plotting its destruction with nukes that never came. The building transitions from a bustling hive of mobilization to a quiet, deadly chess player. The sheer permanence of the concrete makes the idea of disassembly laughable. It is too big to fail, too big to close. It becomes an institution, as vital and unmovable as the Capitol or the White House. The Cold War freezes the Pentagon in time. It remains a fortress, vigilant and paranoid. The corridors that once echoed with the optimism of 1945 now echo with the fear of mutually assured destruction. The building provides the perfect architecture for the Cold War. Secretive, enclosed, massive, and defensive. It is a bunker for the bureaucracy of the apocalypse. The psychology of the space begins to warp those who work within it. The Pentagon develops its own culture, its own language, its own hierarchy. The ring you work in defines your status. The earring is the corridor of power, where the carpets are plush and the windows look out on the monuments. To have an office in the earring is to have arrived. The inner rings are the tank, the working class of the military, where the air is stale and the view is of a blank wall. The building enforces a rigid stratification. It is a pressure cooker. The insularity creates a Pentagon mentality, a belief that the solution to every problem is military. The building cuts its occupants off from the civilian world. You drive into the parking lot, walk through the checkpoint, and enter a sealed environment where the only reality is the mission. The sheer size of the place fosters a sense of anonymity and collective responsibility. It is easy to sign an order that destroys a village when you are deep inside the bearing, surrounded by fluorescent lights and limestone. The building acts as a filter, removing the messy humanity from the business of killing. It sanitizes war. The long walks down the radial corridors give men time to think, but also time to detach. The palace of the puzzle becomes a place where logic is carried to its extreme, often irrational conclusions. The architecture of the Pentagon is complicit in the decisions made there. It is a machine for processing violence, and like any machine, it shapes the behavior of its operators. The building demands order, hierarchy, and silence. It suppresses dissent. To work there is to be a cell in a larger organism, serving a brain that is dispersed across 5 concentric rings. The psychological weight of the stone presses down on the conscience. It is a place where policy is made, a sterile word for blood and fire. Despite its fortress-like appearance, the Pentagon is vulnerable. It is a low, spreading target impossible to hide. The illusion of invincibility is shattered on September 11, 2001, when American Airlines Flight 77 slams into the western side of the building. The date serves as a horrific echo of the groundbreaking exactly 60 years prior. The plane hits the newly renovated wedge, slicing through the rings that were built to withstand conventional bombs, not jet fuel. The tragedy exposes the fragility of the structure. The impenetrable fortress is breached. But in the aftermath, the building demonstrates its resilience. The section that was hit, reinforced during the renovation, does not collapse immediately, allowing thousands to escape. The design, built for the heavy loads of 1,941 archives, saves lives in 2001. The fire rages, the limestone blackens, but the building stands. The vulnerability acts as a turning point. The Pentagon ceases to be just a command center. It becomes a shrine. The turning point is not the destruction, but the survival. The scar on the side of the building is rebuilt with defiant speed, the Phoenix Project, mirroring the original frantic construction of 1941. But the innocence, if there ever was any, is gone. The building is no longer just the hunter. It is the prey. The realization changes the atmosphere. The security tightens. The perimeter pushes outward. The public nature of the building, which once allowed civilians to wander the concourse, is ended. The Pentagon retreats further into its shell. It becomes a fortress in the truest sense, surrounded by barriers and guards. The vulnerability highlights the paradox of the structure. It is a symbol of strength that attracts violence. The 5 sides are a bullseye. The event forces a reckoning with the legacy of the building. It is not just an office. It is a battlefield. The blood spilled in the corridors in 2001 mingles metaphorically with the sweat of the laborers in 1941. The loop of history closes. The building has absorbed the trauma and kept functioning. It is a scarred veteran, a survivor of the very wars it directed. Today, the Pentagon is a mix of the archaic and the ultramodern. It is a living paradox. The limestone facade is constantly scrubbed and pointed, fighting the slow erosion of acid rain and exhaust fumes. Inside, the building is in a state of perpetual renovation. The wedges are gutted and rebuilt one by one, the asbestos removed, the wiring updated for the digital age. The 1940s concrete skeleton is filled with fiber optic cables and servers. It is a cyborg building, an old body fitted with a new brain. The maintenance of the beast is a Herculean task. The pipes from the segregated era are finally replaced. The ramps are brought up to code. But the bones remain. The sheer mass of the place refuses to yield. It is a heavy, stubborn object that insists on its own relevance. The restoration is an admission that we cannot imagine a world without the Pentagon. We invest billions to keep the heart beating. The building has outlived its creators, its original purpose, and its enemies. It has outlived the Soviet Union. It has outlived the architects who drew it on a weekend. It stands as a testament to the inertia of the military-industrial complex. The temporary solution has become the most permanent thing in Washington. It is a constant backdrop to the news, a visual shorthand for power. The modern Pentagon is cleaner, brighter, and safer, but the ghosts of the swamp are still there. The dampness of the basement still remembers the Potomac. The layout still confuses the rookie. The building is a living organism that sheds its skin but keeps its shape. It dominates the landscape of Northern Virginia, a gravitational black hole that pulls in money and spits out strategy. It is a monument to the endurance of bureaucracy. In the final analysis, the Pentagon is a geometric scar on the earth, a five-sided trap that captured the American soul in 1941 and never let go. It teaches us about the hubris of the builder and the fear of the soldier. It was built in secrecy to defend democracy, yet it operates in the shadows, a closed system of authority. The legacy of the Pentagon is not in its limestone or its square footage, but in what it represents, the institutionalization of war as a permanent condition of modern life. We built a machine to fight a specific evil, and when that evil was gone, the machine remained, hungry for new inputs. It sits there today, silent and massive, reflecting the gray waters of the Potomac. It is a sanctuary for the generals and a cage for the world. The beauty of its lines belies the darkness of its purpose. It is a gilded gloom, a magnificent, terrible achievement of human organization. The laborers who toiled in the mud of Hell's Bottom have long since returned to the dust, but their work stands immutable. The building does not speak. It commands. It is the silent protagonist of the American century, the stone face of a superpower. As the sun sets over Arlington, casting long shadows across the parking lots, the Pentagon glows with a cold, artificial light, a beacon of order in a chaotic world, watching, listening, and waiting. The swamp is gone, covered by the slab, but the nature of the ground remains. Soft, shifting, and hungry. The Pentagon is the ultimate monument to the 20th century, a structure built in a panic that became the bedrock of our reality. It is beautiful, it is terrifying, and it is permanent.